everyone, my name's Kate Brown and I'm KeyPay's Marketing Manager and co-host of our podcast, The Payoff. In the midst of the COVID-19 crisis, KeyPay have been speaking to lots of different businesses on how they're coping through COVID-19, and we hear lots of stories about how people are pivoting their business model in reaction to these government restrictions. Now, in this video, we speak to Adam Cheers, who is a Sydney restaurant owner, and he has done just that. He's completely transformed the way his two venues work. They're completely online now, and he is on a mission to help as many other venues as possible to achieve the same. This video goes into detail about how Adam broke down his financials to see what his two venues would look like in the next 6 months, how his venues would be impacted by the government restrictions, and also which outgoing costs he could actually take control of. So upon doing that, he actually found he could take control of one key thing, and that was external delivery commissions. Hi everybody, and welcome to the Payoff podcast. So today we're Zoom calling with Adam Cheers. Hi Adam.
Hey guys, how are we?
Good, thanks. So Adam is an owner of two restaurants in Sydney, and he'll tell you a bit more about that soon. But just wanted to say, in the past 5 to 6 weeks, the coronavirus pandemic has completely changed the way we're all working. It's disrupted the way businesses operate. It's caused major financial issues for restaurants and cafes in particular, with all of these government restrictions. So KeyPay has been looking out for positive stories on how businesses have pivoted in reaction to COVID-19 in order to survive, but most importantly to thrive after these restrictions have been lifted. So Adam's story was particularly inspiring because not only has he made some very smart and agile decisions and changes to his two venues, but he now wants to offer help to as many other venues as possible during all this. So Adam, welcome, and we'd love to hear a bit more about you, your story, and what changes you've been making over the past 6 weeks.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks for having me too. It's a pleasure being here. So yeah, as you mentioned, I own two restaurants in Sydney. One of them is called The Pickle. It's been in operation in Surrey Hills for about 5 years. It's an American-inspired burger restaurant and cocktail bar. We do things like craft beer on tap and crazy burgers and bar snacks and desserts. And my other brand is Peanut Butter Jelly, based in Manly. We've been there about 2 years, and that's a celebration of street food and street art from all around the world. And again, cocktails, desserts, share plates. It's both venues are very heavily based around a in-store customer dine-in experience. And so when we were faced with the government restrictions due to COVID-19, it had a major impact on our business because we were forced to offer takeaway and delivery only. And so, we were down, and from a lot of people I'm speaking to in the market, it's very similar numbers. A lot of venues are down 80 to 90% in this current climate. So it's really important for myself and also many other operators out there in Australia to be able to adapt and do it quickly so that we can survive during what's a challenging time that we're all dealing with right now.
Yeah, fantastic, Adam. What was the first thing that you sort of thought of to do when you realized that things were changing so rapidly and this was going to have a massive impact on your business?
Yeah, I think the first thing I wanted to do is understand my financials. So I sat down and I started doing some financial modeling for both of my businesses to kind of project what my business would look like. I could foresee that we were going to go into some form of lockdown, whether that was going to be a complete lockdown or some sort of restriction of trade. Ultimately, that was going to have a major impact on my business. And so I wanted to really dig deep into the numbers and the financials and understand what are the impacts that that's going to have on my business so that I can make some better informed decisions to be able to try and adapt or survive during that time. So for me, as I broke down the numbers, I started to look at a few key areas. I started to make some estimates around my sales and revenue. At that stage, not knowing what sort of impact we were going to have, but looking at our current volumes and sort of looking ahead as to what that might look like, I made some estimates that would probably be looking at an 80 to 90% reduction. And so it seems like that was actually the case as we started to progress through some of those restrictions. And so obviously that's a huge impact, especially because we're primarily based around a customer experience. You know, both venues have 130 seats in each venue or thereabouts. And, you know, we rely heavily on customers coming and dining in the venue for food and drinks and desserts and you name it. So without that, you know, the numbers are affected severely. And so I guess it's being realistic about those numbers as well, because it's one thing to put a number in your projections, but if it's not accurate, then it throws everything out. And so it's important to be realistic about what you think is actually going to be happening in the business. Some of the other areas I looked at was my cost of goods. So immediately I drew my attention to the menu. Obviously, we're now not providing an experience inside the venue for customers. We're concentrating on trying to deliver an experience for the customers at their home, and so therefore that was a little bit different to what we're usually doing. So, is there a way that we could limit the menu or reduce the menu or change some items on the menu to try and reduce our wastage, minimize our cost of goods? Because, you know, our cost of goods is something which can be extremely high even when we're in full operation mode. So, you know, any things that we can do to try and maintain our cost of goods, particularly during a time like this where our revenue is challenged, is really important to try and control the costs so that we can, you know, try and at least cover the bills during this time. Because over this time, it's pretty naive to think that we're going to be running a profitable business. That's not the case, and that's not the objective here. The objective is really how do we minimize the damage, and how do we survive during this time so that we can come out the other side and then have a profitable business to continue operating in the future. So cost of goods was really important. Obviously, wages is another big area of the financials that we needed to understand. So across both venues, we had around 40 staff across both venues, and that was both casual, full-time staff members. And unfortunately, just due to the impact of COVID, we were left with no other choice but to let quite a lot of staff go. We were left with only 2 staff in each venue. So there's you know, over 35 staff that had to be let go during that time. That's not something that we wanted to do, but in order for the business to survive, so that there was opportunity available for the remaining staff, and hopefully a future as well, we had to make those tough decisions. And so with a revenue that's been cut severely by 80 to 90%, obviously we're looking at reduced operating hours, and wages is one of the biggest costs in any hospitality business. So needing to make some big changes to the staffing and the roster was really important, and a crucial decision to do that as quickly as possible to try and save as much money during this time. Unfortunately for our business, we had a lot of staff that were on temporary visas, and I think it's very common in the hospitality business, particularly throughout Australia, is that a lot of staff are either on student visas, working holiday visas. In our case, we had a few staff that were on temporary skill visas because we'd sponsored them in the business. And so unfortunately, the JobKeeper program didn't apply to those staff members. And so as a business owner, I am to this day, still absorbing those costs, just out of loyalty to those staff members to retain them so that we can still operate successfully once COVID passes, because, you know, ultimately this will pass. It's just a matter of time. We just don't know how long that time is going to be, but we need to make sure we've got the right team in place so that we can recover quickly and start to gain that momentum as quickly as possible, because the recovery is just as important as the survival during this time. So, so wages was super important. Another thing is rent. So rent was one of the biggest costs that at that point when I was reviewing my financials is not something that I had a lot of control over. Now the government's announced obviously a new commercial leasing code, which puts some controls around tenants' entitlements for their commercial rent. So there's some assistance there to try and work through that. But at the end of the day, even with the assistance from the government on the rent reductions, there's still a lot of rent to pay. It's not fully in accordance with the reduction that the business is receiving. There may be some deferrals of rent payments which get pushed back to a later term, which ultimately you still have to pay that back at some point. So whilst it may help in the current situation, there are some long-term disadvantages with having to repay some of that rent. But it's just an area that is a difficult thing to address. So that was one thing which at that point I felt I didn't have much control over. Utilities was another. It's obviously a big expense, gas and electricity. However, to continue to operate in any normal situation and also during COVID, we need to keep the doors open. We need to keep the lights on. We need to continue operating so we can earn an income. Therefore, there was not much that we could do to cover our gas and utility costs. Again, the energy companies have been great in providing some assistance. But again, that's by way of deferral of payments, which means that we don't pay them now. We obviously have to pay them at a later stage. So again, short-term benefit, but also some long-term considerations that we need to have. However, once reviewing all of those costs, the biggest cost and one of the most important areas of the business that I identified was I've been working with external delivery partners such as Uber Eats, Deliveroo, Menulog, DoorDash, and for about 4.5 years. I was a launch partner with a lot of these partners when they launched here in Australia. And when I reviewed my financials, what I found is that the commissions paid to these platforms was probably one of the biggest expenses that I was going to incur during the COVID period. Obviously, being forced to doing takeaway and delivery only, there became a lot of reliance on being able to facilitate these orders through these external platforms. And so naturally what happens is the business is performing a certain level of revenue, but now it has a much higher cost attached to it purely because the commission's now being paid to the external delivery provider. So, that in my projections was going to pose a really big issue in my business during this time.
Is that something that you had when you started digging into the financials, were you anticipating like, oh, I kind of already know that, a huge chunk of my revenue is going out to these commissions, or was that a total surprise for you? Like, how aware were you of that before you started reaching in and looking at the numbers?
It's a great question. I'm guilty of this as many other venue owners around Australia is that I probably didn't fully comprehend or understand how big of a financial impact those commissions can have on the bottom line profit of the business. And so I was aware and I knew that it wasn't profitable transactions, but I sort of justified it under the heading of, say, marketing, if you like, because it was allowing my brand and my business to be exposed on a platform where there was potential customers who may or may not have known who I was. So I saw the benefit of attracting new customers, and I sort of neglected or overlooked the amount of money that was actually being lost, through every single transaction. And so as I speak to many venue owners throughout the country, I'm finding that many people are in the same position. They don't fully understand their numbers. And when you really break it down, and I'm helping a lot of business owners break down their cost in their business. And, for those that don't know, the profit in a hospitality business is very, very small. We work on really thin margins. If you're a really, really good operator and you've got everything under control, usually you might end up with a net profit of about 4 or 5%. If you're a good operator. Now, that's a really, really thin margin because the costs are extremely high. They're ongoing. There's big commitments to make in the business, and so so when you take, and that's before the delivery commissions. So once you factor in the external delivery commissions from these partners, you're losing anywhere between 24 to 35% of your bottom line profit. And so that's a lot of money. I speak to a lot of business owners that are doing hundreds of orders a week through these external platforms, and they're working extremely hard, and they get to the end of the month and they're wondering where all their money is. You know, they've just got enough money to pay for the bills, and they seem to be going backwards or drowning every month. And I can see it very clearly where all their money is going. It's going to external commissions. And so, again, you know, there is a place in the market for these platforms, because I accept the fact that I lose money on these platforms, because I use it as a form of marketing to attract customers. But it's a choice. I choose to use that, and I accept those conditions. I think the biggest issue that a lot of people in the industry have is that they don't understand the impact it's having on their business, and they don't feel like they've got any other options. And the reality is that there are alternatives out there. And so you don't have to use them if you don't want to. You know, since I've set up my online ordering platform, we've then you know, been able to move a lot of our orders across to our business directly. And so now we're saving money on our commissions paid to these external providers, and able to squeeze a little bit more profit out of the business to be able to help pay some bills during what's a really financially challenging period.